And so as I was looking at this week's Torah portion, Omer, and the counting of the Omer, I found that they both have the same two-letter root stem, that mem resh root. And it's intriguing to me because if you know the Hebrew language, and Brenda's been doing a marvelous job teaching the Hebrew class, the mem resh root in both Omer and Omer is prefixed or has attached to it two silent letters. One's the aleph and one's the ayin. The symbolism, as you look at it, is kind of interesting because those silent vowels, one of them is masculine. And I believe which is the aleph, and I believe it's the ayin that carries a feminine connotation to it. And if you look at the root letters, the aleph and the mem and the resh, just rearrange them to where it forms the mem resh aleph marah. It forms a root that indicates something that's filthy and unclean and unholy. Now let me share this with you. No matter what word you style out, the individual letters retain their word picture. And so you can be in the season of the counting of the Omer, and yet you can be found as that Omer count, which is indicating what's coming out of your mouth, because Omer and Omer are closely related to Amar, which means to speak, and out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth will speak. Say amen. And so if you're taking note or paying attention to what's coming out of your mouth, it could be that in the season of the counting of this Omer, the marah, the filthy, unclean, and unholy things are what's boiling up on the inside of us and coming out. And I believe that Abba has been intensifying the heat, if you will, in the believing community, because I'm honest with you. How many of you follow some of the social media, and don't you see some filthy and unclean things boiling out of people that call themselves believers? It's amazing. It's amazing to me. And as I was looking again at this two-letter root stem, the mem resh, it indicates something that's bitter. It's the root of the word that is associated with the Niddah waters and the bitter waters at Marah. And as I was also alluding to, you insert the aleph and you insert the ayin, masculine and feminine. It seems as if that it's indicating the salvific message. In other words, Yahweh's saying, I will. The aleph indicates I will. I will plant my seed in the womb of bitterness. And so I had to ask myself, if we're in this season between Passover and Shavuot, I believe this is a season of bitterness. Are you listening to me? Why? Because something is being churned up on the inside of us to change our character and our nature and our personality, to get us to the place where Yahweh can infill us with His Holy Spirit at Mount Sinai and Shavuot. And so it seems as if we're in a season where what may have been filthy and unclean as we left Passover could be subjected to the scrutiny of the Ruach HaKodesh, and that rubbing and pressing during this bitter season. And it's an indicator that if we will allow it, we are going through a season of changing. Abba's allowing the pressure this season to knock the rough edges off and to change this innate carnal fleshly nature. Does that make sense to you? And I don't believe it's an accident as we've left the Passover season that the counting of the Omer, in my opinion, I believe it began the first Sabbath after Passover. And the reason for that, well, there's a lot of dissenting opinions, but I believe that the reason for the dissenting opinions, in particular out of the Jewish community, is simply as a method to obfuscate the death, burial, and resurrection and the timing of those festivals inside Passover, Feast of Unleavened Bread, and Yom HaBikurim, early first fruits, which occurred 3 days after the death of Yeshua, which would have been timed with His resurrection. And so I believe that the weekly Sabbath after Pesach begins to count. And I'm also convinced that it coincides with the exact timing, again, of the death, burial, and subsequent resurrection of Messiah. And I am also convinced that it would follow the same pattern as the children of Israel would exit Egypt. There are a lot of dissenting opinions. Most of the rabbis say that they came out on the 7th day of the festival of unleavened bread. I believe they would have went into and come out of the Red Sea on that 3rd day, which would have been consistent with the death, burial, and resurrection. Going into the waters, a living mikveh, if you will, being a shadow picture of the death, burial, and subsequent resurrection of Messiah. So it leads me to believe that during this season, something has to die. And something has to be resurrected. But it also, as we follow the pattern, we know that the spring festivals are not finished until you get to Shavuot, where you have the Pentecostal experience, as we've been fond of calling it, where the Ruach HaKodesh infilled the people there at Mount Sinai, and later there in Acts, where you had the Pentecostal experience. It leads me to believe that it wasn't a finished act, that there was something that was going to be climactic here at the day of Pentecost at Shavuot at Mount Sinai that was lacking as we were making that transition period. Does that make sense? And so I believe that there's something that's taking place, something working in us. And as Abba was revealing some of these things to me, the connections were amazing. I was looking at the numeric value of the Red Sea, Yam Suf, and it has a numeric value of 196, which just so happens it's a coincidence, if you will. Nobody really believes that these gematria, these numeric values, have any merit to the Hebrew language. It just happens that the Hebrew language is alphanumeric. You know, every letter has an equivalent numeric value. And so Yahweh just, he just kind of inserts it. And every now and then one of these things fits together. Oh, my goodness. I don't believe that you could have any, I don't believe you could be in your right mind and actually say that. Because the mind of the Creator is so infinite that we can't even begin to plumb the depths or ascend the heights of it without listening to His instructions. And the numeric value of Yam Suf, Red Sea, 196, it's the same as the Hebrew word kuch, which means to awaken from the slumber of death and to be resurrected. And I thought, oh my goodness, there's something taking place in this period. Now we understand that there was the death, and you talked about it, Revelation 13:8. The Lamb was slaughtered, the Lamb was slain before the foundation of the world, so it was necessary that one could come and die for us. And so we know that this is a season of death and yet resurrection. Am I right? But what is death really? We understand that death is separation from the presence of Yahweh. When this physical body lays down, what's on the inside of this physical body is not dead. Am I right? Or is it? This physical body is just a vehicle. And so I had to go back and begin to look at some of the connections here to find out really what's happening in this pattern. We understand that Israel, just like Yeshua, comes out of Egypt, which is a shadow picture of death and the grave. They come out of Egypt at Passover, and then they go through the transition period of entering into a mikveh, if you will, in the Red Sea, 3 days, just like Yeshua's death, burial, and resurrection. And so I had to ask myself, if they came out bodily, then what really was being resurrected at that season? And you have to ask these questions, and I'm going to share something with you. The truth can stand your scrutiny. And if you're studying under or sitting under a pastor or a rabbi or whomever that's trying to teach you some things and share some things with you, and he gets upset because you question what he's teaching with you, then you need to back off from that, because truth will stand scrutiny. Say amen. And so while I was looking at this word Omer, spelt here with ayin mem resh, remember, the aleph and the ayin are interchangeable, so Omer, Emer, Emor, they're closely related. And it just so happens that it has the same value and the same Hebrew letters as the word arom, which means to be naked. And so let me just ask you this, as this is something that Yahweh is speaking to me as I'm putting these things down on paper, and I believe it's revelatory to me as an individual, and I believe it's something that He's trying to teach me, but I also believe it's something He's trying to teach us as a corporate body. And so is it possible that this counting of the Omer season, that it's actually the season of our nakedness as well? Don't you want to be naked and bare, exposed before Him? Say amen. And so I had to ask myself, what does the word arom, what does nakedness truly mean? And we've looked at it here a couple of weeks back when we were teaching on something similar to this. What does arom, what does nakedness truly mean? And how does it apply to where we are right now in this holy convocation, this season that I believe is leading us to a divine intimate encounter with our King, our husband, our Mashiach at Mount Sinai? What's taking place here? Well, that word arom, remember, it has the individual letters are the same as in Omer. Ayin resh mem. It indicates to be prudent, to be shrewd and crafty. It means more than just being bereft or absent of clothes. Are you listening to me? In fact, if you go back and read Proverbs chapter 15, verse 5, look at this. The same word is used, the same word, arom, naked, is used. It says, a fool despises his father's instruction, listen to this, but he that regarded reproof, in other words, if you pay attention and you listen to the correction that comes or the reproof that comes from your father, then you're naked. That's what it says in the Hebrew language. It actually means prudent here. You're shrewd and crafty. Why? Because you pay attention to correction and reproofs. And so this season of nakedness has something to do with reproof coming from the Father so that we can become prudent and we can become shrewd in our relationship with Him. A prudent person is an individual that sees calamity and prepares for it in advance. A prudent person is one who takes a position based on knowledge and instruction. Are you feeling me here? And so if I go back and I look at this word arom, again, same Hebrew letters as Omer, same relative word as Emor for words, and Amar for words. The first time it's used is in Genesis chapter 2, verse 25. And it's used to describe the condition of the male and female after his body's created. Yahweh breathes into him, reaches inside him and takes out the DNA of the man and then builds from that DNA the woman, if you will, and brings her and presents him to him. It says, regarding those two, and you have to understand context here is important because this is right after Yahweh has breathed the neshama into the man. And so he takes that same neshama and deposits it in this female body as well. And so the definition of prudence, naked, it says they are both naked and not ashamed. And again, because of the King James English, the fixation has always been on absence of clothes, when I don't believe that that's what it's alluding to. I believe you have to go back and look at context, and the context here is relative to the condition of their mind. In other words, it's relative to the fact that Yahweh had breathed the neshama, his breath, into them. Are you following me? And it's in that condition of having the breath and mind and intellect of Yahweh inside of them that they were prudent and that they were shrewd. And when I thought about that, I was reminded of Isaiah 55, when he says, for his thoughts and his ways are higher than our thoughts and our ways. And I thought, now, that's my husband and I'm the bride, and if it's telling me that based on that, just a general synopsis of that verse there in Isaiah 55, that I cannot know his thoughts and I cannot know his ways, and yet I'm supposed to be echad, one with him, there's something disjointed here. If my wife and I, we've been married for 27 years, if after 27 years my ways and my thoughts are higher than hers, and so that she cannot understand, she can't truly know me, then there's something wrong. Are you following me? And so how can I know the mind of Yahweh? How can I know the thoughts of my Creator? And again, if there was ever a season when we need to know the mind of Mashiach, and you quoted verses several times today, in Philippians it says, let this mind be in you, which was also in Messiah Yeshua, who didn't think that there was anything wrong with being considered equal with Yahweh. My goodness, do you realize what's being told us? It's interesting because the context here in Genesis chapter 2, verse 25, when it says that Adam and Eve are naked and not ashamed, it's talking about the condition that their mind is in, the original state or condition of the mind of man after the forming of his body. I want you to remember that, okay? This is after his body's been formed, because something takes place here. And so if we can understand that there's a presence that's breathed into us that contains the mind of the Creator, and it's how we interrelate to that mind, those thoughts, those ways that He has, that determines whether or not we are literally going to be allowed to be intimate with Him or not. Then I believe it begs us to go back and look. In fact, I was looking in Job chapter 32, verse 8, and this is what it says. I have for you up there, you have it in the Hebrew, Akin ruach hu be'enos ve'nishmat shaddai tevenim. But there is a spirit, in parentheses, I give you the Hebrew word, it's a ruach. But there is a spirit in man, and the inspiration of the Almighty gives him understanding. The word inspiration there is neshama. There's a spirit in man, but the neshama of Yahweh, the intellect, the mind of Yahweh gives them understanding. We're living in a season where confusion abounds, and I promise you, everybody wants to know what's happening, what's going on. And I'm listening to all of these individuals on social media put out what they believe is going to happen, and I'm thinking, why not just pray? Why not just pray and get the answer from the source instead of being so moved or motivated by what someone else, some talking head is saying in the news, or whether or not I agree or disagree with someone else's opinion. In my opinion, it doesn't really matter. What matters is what the Ruach is speaking to me at this particular time. It might be dangerous for you to entertain going into a fiery furnace. But if Abba says that I'm going to put you into a fiery furnace, then I need to understand that the condition inside that fiery furnace is predicated upon my relationship with him before, during, and after. Say amen. I don't want to get inside the furnace and then begin to cultivate intimacy. Somebody's going to be in the smoking section. Are you listening to me? And so what's happening here is it's giving us an indicator that this season is actually a review, if you will, or a rehearsal of what took place in Eden. In Eden, the minds of Adam and Chava, I don't like to, like you said, I don't like to call her Chava because that's after the fall. It's an after the fall term. She was known as the Isha, the Ish and the Isha. Initially, they were pure in their mind. Their minds were living and holy and pure. It's the mind or the breath from Yahweh. Listen to me carefully. The neshama that causes this body to live, it's the mind that enables this body to be holy, even though this body was formed first. And let me just go a little bit further. The body without the mind is dead. Let me just give you a simple illustration. I have a Dodge pickup in the parking lot. Can I ask you a question? You're relatively I say that with kindness. You're relatively intelligent individuals. What is the mind of my Dodge pickup? Not the motor. The mind of the Dodge pickup is the individual who goes in and turns the key. Are you listening to me? I turn the key. I'm the mind of that Dodge vehicle. But because that thing has about 190,000 miles on it, once the mind turns it on and begins to travel with that vehicle, because that vehicle has been driven in certain ways, brakes are worn in certain ways, tires are worn certain ways. There's just certain things that truck does simply because of rote habit. Are you following me? But the moment that I turn the key off, the mind leaves the vehicle, the truck will not go anywhere. Are you listening to me? I want you to pay attention because this is directly, in my opinion, given to you and I to teach us how to deal with this vehicle that I travel in, who has no mind of its own until this one's turned on. And so many of you sitting out there, many of you are listening today, you're having some difficulties. There's things in your life that are habitual, ritual problem areas. Am I right? Things that you are constantly having to deal with. And how many times do you have these thoughts interjected into your mind, and the first thing you want to do is go rebuke the devil? Come on, just say amen. You know you want to rebuke the devil. And guess what? He comes back, or it comes back. The thought comes back. The thought comes back. Well, there's no record in Scripture of a man or a woman that's filled with the Ruach HaKodesh rebuking the enemy, but what that enemy had to leave and stayed away. And so if I'm rebuking something that is constantly coming back, then I would submit to you that it's not Satan that's the issue. See how my voice went up? That means you better pay attention. And so I'm convinced that we're blaming him for about 98% of the issues we have when it's not really his fault. Well, then whose fault is it? Come on, let's deal with this thing. Let's look at that word neshama, translated as breath. Yahweh breathed the Etz Chaim. He breathed into the Adam the tree of life. He breathed into Adam the breath of life, and Adam became a living soul. He had the ability from that time forward, with the intellect of Yahweh in him, to do the very same thing with his words that Abba did himself. And so this word for breath, intellect, and inspiration, neshama, it actually comes from an interesting root, the word nesham, and it's only used one time, and it's in Isaiah chapter 42, verse 14, and it speaks very prophetically of the coming of Messiah. And it says as Messiah comes, and he's going to exact vengeance on his enemies. And I had to ask, what enemies? We know that the physical people really are not the enemy of Yahweh, am I right? I believe that the enemies that he's alluding to here are death, hell, and the grave. How can you say that? Well, I'm convinced that he defeated death and hell and the grave, but I also believe that he's bringing that instruction and that understanding, that knowledge to a body of people who can also step out and defeat those same enemies. If you look at the root word there, nesham, in neshama, it indicates a deep gasping of breath, a panting as if a woman's in labor. And if you understand the it's indicating that there's a force behind this breathing. It's an intentional, forceful labor. For what purpose? To birth something. And so if Abba's breathing his neshama, his intellect, into this body, the purpose of breathing in here is so that he can produce, he can birth a son in the earth. And that son's purpose is to subdue the enemy, to exercise dominion over the enemy, to be fruitful and multiply so that you can give birth yourself out of your own loins. And I'm talking not so much the physical loins as I am the spiritual loins of a man, so that you can reproduce others of like kind. That's the whole law of Genesis. And so Abba's wanting us to be able to stand up and become the men and women that he's called us to be, the sons of the Most High, the very ones that creation itself is groaning for, so that we can release them from the curse. Hallelujah. How can I release creation from the curse when I'm walking around cursing myself? The question we have to ask ourselves, are we in the season where the original naked, in other words, the prudent, shrewd condition of the mind devoid of a carnal influence, is being restored to the body? Are you listening to me carefully? I want you to understand something. You blame a lot of your problems, or most of your problems, on your flesh. Am I right? That's what we've been taught to do. Blame it on the flesh. This flesh don't do anything until I turn the key. Are you hearing me? And so when I say it's my flesh, no, the only reason it's my flesh is because my mind has turned this thing on, and my mind has caused my flesh to cultivate some habits. And if I want that truck to change its habits, then I got to change whoever's turning the key. Are you listening to me? I know what you're thinking. Ooh, more power. I want something with a bigger motor. I want a bigger mind. I want a pure mind. I want this motor overhauled. Are you listening to me? I believe if you study Zephaniah 3 verse 8, and this is one that it's been part of the mantra of the Hebrew roots community, Yahweh's restoring a pure language to his people. Am I right? That language is literally nothing short of the mind or the neshama of Yahweh. He's restoring the neshama. He's restoring the breath, the word, the intellect, the mind. He's restoring his soul that he's deposited in us. But it's interesting. Go back and read verses 1 through 7. Verses 1 through 7 speak of the nations that are marah, the same word for Omer, backwards, mem, resh, aleph, meaning filthy. He's speaking to the nations that are filthy, the opposite of the Omer. And the reason they're called filthy is because, and it says it, because they did not obey his voice and they refused instruction. And so if he's releasing instruction to us right now, if he's attempting to breathe into this body, I don't know if I can grasp that. How many of you have ever heard of Ezekiel chapter 37 through 39? The valley of dry bones. Speak to those bones, Son of Man, and tell them to live. And I spoke to those bones, and they stood up on their feet, but yet there was no breath in them. And so what did Abba have the prophet to do? He said, prophet, he said, Son of Man, speak to the four winds. And you said it earlier, let the north give up, let the south give up, let the east and west give up, let the winds blow, so that the breath, the neshama, the intellect, the knowledge, the understanding. What is it that Abba's trying to teach us in this hour? You better get this, or you're going to be a dead body. Why is the restoration of a pure mind critical? Let's go back and let's see what happened in the transition from Genesis chapter 1 and 2 to Genesis chapter 3. I believe that there's a major theme that's overlooked here. And I believe you can see it in Genesis chapter 2 at the forming of the Adam. After Abba forms his body and he releases his neshama, his mind, his intellect, he breathes into him. Then in verse 16 is something interesting in the King James English. I believe, again, that the King James is corrupted intentionally. You may not agree, but if you go back and look at the Hebrew, then you'll notice that there's a different perspective. Are you getting anything? Here's what's said. And Yahweh Elohim commanded the man. Did you see that? If I command you to do something, there's no choice for you. Am I right? If I command you, if Yahweh as the sovereign creator of the universe commands a man, saying, of every tree of the garden you may freely eat. I'm like, wait a second. You've just commanded me, but now you're telling me I can eat of every tree freely? That's not a command. That sounds more like a suggestion or some instructions rather than an abject command, doesn't it not? Help me out here. And so I went back to look at it in the Hebrew language, and that phrase there, the latter part of the phrase is Mikol Etz Hagan Akol Toakal. And again, Yahweh commanded Adam, yet he's told you may freely do so, you may freely eat. You need to, when you see these kind of things and you've got a little red flag waving here, you need to go back and check it out, because I was trying to teach you something. And if you look, it's translated here in the plural, this word for tree, of every one of the trees in the garden. That's how it's translated in King James English. But I believe that the context is different here, because the context seems to be pointing out a specific singular reference to the tree. And I believe it's translated by the King James translators in the plural because of the kaf lamed root of all kol trees.